Hello, this is Nick here from Vegans Be the Change on Sunday the 24th of November, just with a brief roundup of this week's vegan news. The thing that most struck me was the video that came out that was prepared by an organisation called Surge, and they have a campaign on called Dismantle Dairy, and they put out a video which was as a result of hidden cameras on UK farms for the past 18 months. And as you'd expect, there's some pretty shocking systematic abuse of cows, of calves, seeing them being beaten, thrown around. It's really enough for anybody watching it to go right off dairy. And I'll put a link below this video. You can to the video. It's well worth showing to people who really don't understand and know what's going on in the dairy industry. It's just less than 7 minutes. It was narrated by the incomparable Earthling Ed, and it got 38,000 views in the first 24 hours, and by 4 days it had 121,000 views. So that's clearly making waves, and the reactions to it have been really quite strong. People find it really hard to bear. So that was a big item from this week. Another thing that occurred to me that was important was the Economist Magazine put out yet another article in a powerful essay in favour of veganism, and this time it was to do with the environmental impact of it. The Economist Magazine at the beginning of this year talked about 2019 as being the year of the vegan, and they've been proved right, essentially, I think, given the extraordinary progress of this movement during the course of this year. And this article came out as a result of a study from Oxford University and the University of Minnesota talking about the ecological benefits of changing agricultural methods. And it said that if 2/3 of all meals were vegan, then the carbon dioxide emissions would be reduced by 60%. So that's quite something. So the Economist Magazine is becoming quite a cheerleader for the vegan movement. There's a fascinating bit of news from the States about a class action where somebody called Philip Williams, who bought an Impossible vegan burger in Atlanta, Georgia, is suing Burger King. Of course, America's a very litigious society, as we all know. It's suing Burger King because his Impossible non-meat burger was prepared on a grill that was shared with meat burgers, and so it was almost certainly covered in all sorts of lots of animal fat. Now, if you don't want to consume animal products, that's fair enough. You don't want to have a vegan patty dripping and drenched in animal fat. Of course you don't. But whether the answer is to go and sue them and demand that the judge orders all the kitchens to have an extra grill put in for this is going quite a long way. Of course, and a lot of people aren't very sympathetic with this action because a lot of vegans see it as being regressive, that it's going to not encourage other food outlets to serve more non-meat meat. There's two sides to the argument, and certainly what did he expect? An establishment that had been serving meat for decades and decades. And I think in all of this, it's important not to forget the animals, because the fact of the matter is not another animal wasn't hurt in the production of his vegan patty. And he did have the choice of asking for it to be prepared in a microwave. Now, it may well be that Burger King didn't actually make that very clear in that particular restaurant or generally, but they have offered anyone who doesn't want it prepared on that grill can have it done in a microwave. And when I was researching that story, the thing I found actually very disappointing was to discover that the Impossible Burger had been tested by Impossible Foods on rats. PETA had, one of their scientists had tried to help Impossible Foods avoid this, but they did go ahead and treat it on rats, and that is very disappointing. Keeping up the legal theme, it was a very interesting story that there's a brother and sister duo, Aubrey and Cale Welsh, who run an organisation, a very successful small vegan business called the Herbivorous Butcher in Minneapolis, and they applied for a trademark for their business, various trademarks, including one called the Vegan Butcher, and it wasn't granted by the US Patent and Trademark Office. And then 6 weeks later, lo and behold, the huge international food conglomerate Nestle applied for a very similar trademark, and they got it. So Aubrey and Kayla are a little bit cheesed off, if you excuse the pun, as you could well imagine. So they're fighting this, and so it's a very interesting David and Goliath legal battle that's going to be fought out in the US Patent and Trademark Office over the coming months. I shall be following that one with a great deal of interest. In London, we had this extraordinary sight, these massive vegan posters going up around the town, and in particular in Waterloo Station, there was this huge publicity in it, and the quote was "Go ahead, eat like a vegan." And they parked this pink and white bus there in November, giving away free ice cream to passers-by in the rush hour. Ice cream in November, amazing, but huge placards. Go ahead, eat like a vegan. So that's the Swedish company Oatley who's behind that campaign, and they're making quite a name for themselves. They've been painting murals around London and getting some local communities a little bit irate. There was one in Hackney that the locals didn't appreciate too much. But anyway, the message is going out there on big placards around the city. Smithfield Market, not far from there, the famous meat market, has just announced that one of the meat vendors there, PJ Martinelli, it's going to be promoting and selling some vegan meat or non-meat meat. It's a wholesale market to the trade and hotels and restaurants, and they're promoting the British brand Moving Mountain Foods. So that's a historic moment for the Smithfield Meat Market, which was, of course, occupied by Animal Rebellion not so long ago. And one of the really interesting news stories this week is that they've discovered a natural form of vitamin B12. I say they. It's an American company called Parabel USA Inc. And they've discovered that water lentils, otherwise known as duckweed, do actually have a source and a form of vitamin B12 that can be absorbed by humans. And of course, one of the arguments that the meat lobby use about how dreadful veganism is that you're going to be deficient in a key vitamin. Now, of course, the reason vegans don't get vitamin B12 is because the soil has been depleted so much over the last goodness knows how long, and so many meat eaters are deficient in B12 as well. But anyway, it seems as though there's a water form of lentils that can provide this, and that'll be really interesting to see when they've got a patent on it, and hopefully that'll be more generally available in the not too distant future. They hadn't tested it for vitamin B12 because there was this prejudice. There was no such thing as a natural source, but they have, and it does exist. So that's a very interesting development that we'll be watching closely. There's a very interesting story, a study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition about cognitive decline in the elderly. And this is a huge issue as the world's population, the demographic of old people becomes so much bigger. And it's showing that people who in middle age move into a predominantly plant-based diet show between 18 and 33% less likelihood of developing cognitive decline or dementia or Alzheimer's. Now that is quite something, and it's a clarion call for people to take control of their health and to change their diet. It's 18 to 33%. It's very significant. That study was done in Asia, in Singapore predominantly, but the results are dramatic. On the personality front, the CEO of Greggs, who of course introduced the vegan sausage roll recently, their CEO Roger Whiteside has just announced that he basically has stopped eating meat and dairy. He's now vegan and feels better for it, as so many people do. And so I think we can come to expect there's going to be a lot more vegan products from Greggs coming up in the future. The other main personality on the vegan front this week is Chris Froome, no less, four-time winner of the Tour de France, an elite sports athlete, and he's yet another in the long line of sportsmen who appears to be going vegan as a result of watching the Game Changers documentary. That documentary is having quite an impact, particularly in the sports world. And Chris Froome, I mean, that's big news. I think it's been regarded as conventional wisdom that no vegan could really seriously compete for the Tour de France. It's one of the most grueling physical events imaginable in the sporting world. A cyclist a few years ago called David Zabriskie, he did the race. He finished in the position of 100. He was never, a mainstream likely to contribute to compete for the title, but he was the first vegan who did it. And there's other cyclists now who are following that diet. But I do think that if Chris Froome can get back from his injury and get to the top of his game again, and mount a sustained challenge for one of the Grand Tours next year, that would be a real glass ceiling, I think, in terms of the way vegan diets are viewed in the sporting world. So it'd be really, really interesting to watch Chris Froome's progress. There's a ITV